I'll try to contextualize that why it is important for us to particularly understand Ambedkar's view on the topic which I am speaking, which is states reorganization in the current times. And over the course of my 20 minutes talk, I'll try and see if I can make sense about why it is so relevant today as we are progressing. And this contextualization, of course, will be will be based on historicizing what Ambedkar's writings in the times in which he was writing. And it is very important to understand the time in which he was writing, so that we can learn from the times in which we are living, and then respond how relevant and what are the portions and how important his writings are even today. So states reorganization, I would therefore look in that context, which is an unending, unfinished task ever since the creation of the nation state, the creation of the state India has come into being. Particularly, at the time of independence, redrawing of map was a very, very complex and a protracted process, as it involved a number of difficult steps, beginning with partition, the integration of the princely states into independent India, carving out new states within federal structure that reflected the desires of the people of various regions, and most important of all, the responsibility of designing a democratic and participative system of governance. In response to these needs at the time of independence, the Government of India had constituted the States Reorganization Commission on December 22nd, 1953. The state, it submitted its report in 1955, and the map of India was redrawn subsequently by creating 14 states. This was primarily a non-administrative division based entirely on the concept of linguistic prioritization, a concept that the then Prime Minister Nehru in particular was very opposed to initially. But as I said, that it is an unfinished task. Therefore, after that round, there has been at least 4 more rounds of reorganization in subsequent years. One was as early as in 1960s, when the creation of states of Maharashtra and Gujarat and Nagaland in 1963, Haryana and Punjab in 1966. The second major round was soon in 1970s, when the Northeast was split up and several new states were created. The third round began as recent as in 2000, when 3 states, smaller states, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh and Uttaranchal was created. And the most recent was the division of Andhra Pradesh between Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. But if you look at even today, the task is unfinished, because you have the older demands like Vidarbha continues, and the newer demands such as Coorg in Karnataka, Gorkhaland in West Bengal, Bodoland in Assam, and now, as Professor Thorat was mentioning and Professor Pai was just mentioning, that Uttar Pradesh, the viability of Uttar Pradesh is being questioned over and over again and again. Now, in this context, it is important that we also try and understand that what were the major visions, the conflicting visions, rather I would say, which was guiding the states reorganization at the time of independence, and most of us actually know about the 3 conflicting yet well-known visions of the states reorganization which was happening at that place. The first was the nationalist, the second was the Hindu majoritarian, which has been sort of not spoken about, and the third was the communist. So these were the 3 visions which was existing at that point in time. The nationalist vision, of course, was largely shared by the Central Congress leadership, and during the National Movement for Independence, Congress was federally organized with several ethnic and regional leaders championing the issue of the ethnic autonomy to garner people's support. However, given the circumstances at the time of independence, Nehru prioritized security and future economic development of the newly formed India over ethnic and cultural regionalism, and discouraged the idea of reorganizing the states on linguistic principles. This was violently opposed by his own people, his own local leaders in the Congress, for whom linguistic reorganization was an opportunity to capture the state power in the newly formed states in the immediate post-independence period. So therefore, faced with this immediate crisis, he was forced to accept the linguistic criteria as an important criteria to be accepted in terms of state reorganization. The other important view was those of the communists, whose own position has changed. Their position pre-independence about India being a union of autonomous units who also could have the right of self-determination, that had changed from there to to primarily recrafting, redrawing India on the basis of linguistic priorities. For the communist post-independent, linguistic states should be the main principle of any scheme of reorganization, the Indian federal state system, for it was the only option to place the states equal to that of the center. So for them, the priority was that you do not create a center which is so strong that it becomes a Frankenstein monster, and therefore they wanted to keep it checked by having linguistic organization. So that was the prime concern. And on the contrary, you have the just opposite view about the Hindu majoritarian, which actually said that it only wanted to look at Hindustan as one homogeneous country. And hence they proposed a very strong unitary system with a single cabinet and a single legislature. Federalism based on ethno-linguistic criteria for them was a potential tool to undermine the territorial unity and destabilize the central authority. So their idea to divide India into 100, sort of smaller, janapadas that they were quoting, by grouping together several districts, was deliberately intended to divide the linguistic zones to ensure that they do not become mini nationals. So that was the three differing visions existing at that point in time. But unfortunately, there was a view which was based on rationality, based on research, based on thinking, which was completely ignored at that point in time. And it is here important that we try and understand that what was Dr. Ambedkar, how was he visualizing at that point in time the project of the redrawing of map of India at the time of independence. He not only spoke about this, but he actually wrote extensively on the idea of states reorganization. But unfortunately, even academicians, those who were writing at that point in time, both within the country and outside, had actually ignored his views on this particular view. And I'm just quoting a few, which is quite known. John Bondurant's view on region versus provincialism, which is actually a study on the problems of Indian national unity. Then you have Marshall Windmiller, who was writing on linguistic regionalism in India. He wrote 2 consecutive articles in 1954 and 1956. Were ignorant, and they didn't sort of give prominence to his views. The only exception there was Selig Harrison, a journalist whose prophecy on the Indian federalism, although proved false, but his understanding on the views of Ambedkar were quite correct. And therefore, so in the academic discourse, you find that there is a big gap that it was never sort of given due importance. Among the Indian scholars, again, between 1953 and 1956, when this States Reorganization Commission was doing its job, the Economic and Political Weekly, which was then known as Economic Weekly, actually had around 35 items devoted to this issue of reorganization, which includes editorials, letters to editors, special articles, and other formats. But Ambedkar find no mention at that point in time. As recent as 2007, when Ramchandra Guha was writing his book, India After Gandhi, despite devoting a chapter on redrawing the map of India, he was completely silent on Ambedkar. It is only scholars such as A.G. Noorani, Partha Chatterjee, and all others who are present in this hall actually only wrote about, and considered Ambedkar. The 2-3 of us are here. Rajshekhar Gundru is sitting there, yeah. So it is. So that was. It is in this context that I will try and give you a brief about how did Ambedkar shaped his idea about reorganization. And when we started, when we were asked by IDS to do this study, I and Dr. Pai did this study, and we came out with a volume on Ambedkar's idea on state reorganization. It was mind-boggling that there was a man who wrote so extensively on this, yet it was left ignored. One of the important point that is important to keep in mind, that he was always writing as a pragmatist and with an open mind. He was non-partisan and considered the issue from the standpoint of all citizens, which Professor Thorat was pointed out in the morning. That we have to understand Ambedkar's view, his concern for all citizens, and not just talk about the sections of the population. And of course, in that particular, the focus on minorities and the discriminated and the marginalized, of course, becomes a very important function. For him, it was the representative function of any state, and therefore he wanted to look at that. Now, if you try and when we were looking at all the writings of Dr. Ambedkar, we found that there was a plethora of literature which he had written, and we divided that into 3 sections. And those were that he had 4 major tracts written. First was the Pakistan or the partition of India in 1941, followed by States and Minorities in 1947, Maharashtra, the linguistic province, a statement submitted to the Linguistic Province Commission in 1948, which Asha was pointing to, Thoughts on Linguistic States in 1955. Apart from that, he delivered 3 very, very important speeches. One, which was the very beginning of his shaping of his idea, was in the Bombay Legislative Assembly on the issue of a separate Karnataka province on 4th of April 1938. So he actually started shaping and making his ideas on the idea of reorganization of state in 1938. That is the first thing when he sort of breaks in. Then you have the Rajya Sabha, on the Andhra state bill, he spoke on in Rajya Sabha on September 2, and then in the Rajya Sabha again on the States Reorganization Bill on May 1st, 1956. In addition to that, he had 2 major newspaper articles. One is Needs for Checks and Balances, published in the Times of India in 1953, and other was Ambedkar's Recipe from Maharashtra, Voice of People, published in the Free Press Journal of May 31st, 1956. Why am I saying this? Why am I listing these things? It is listing because it's important to understand that there has been a journey. There is a journey that Dr. Ambedkar visualized. He was not just talking he's not just perceiving. He was also living those realities and then constantly responding to those realities. And therefore, it is important that what is it that how his ideas changed over a period of time. Talking about the Karnataka state, in 1938, in the controversial issue in the 1930s, speaking in the Bombay Legislative Assembly in response to a resolution introduced by a member of the Assembly in 1938 on the formation of separate Karnataka Karni-speaking state, he said that he rose to oppose this at that point in time in 1938. And he opposed the resolution on the ground that the feeling of Indianness was still in embryo and had just begun to ripen. Therefore, to allow other loyalties or feeling of culture or feeling of nationality, whether on the basis of religion or region or language, to grow simultaneously was the greatest crime to commit at that point in time. So he also pointed out that the creation of the separate state of Karnataka out of regions such as Bijapur or Bellary, because they were famine-stricken and would not yield enough revenue to look after the needs of the people in it. Too small a state, he held at that point in time, which cannot find the means to carry on its administration, should be avoided, and people do not live on culture, they live on resources they possess. So for him, even at the very beginning, the formation, the restructuring, or the organization of states, resources were a very important component in his work. Now, so and from there you see a journey. Some of the things which I would, if I would say, would become a repetition because Asha has already sort of pointed out. But in 1956 began a new phase when Ambedkar began to grapple with the report of the States Reorganization Commission, and he found that the solutions were not adequate, that the way States Reorganization Commission had actually written. So he was forced to write a detailed response in the form of thoughts on linguistic states. And there some of his ideas which he had formed earlier was changed, and to defend that he wrote in the preface that no thinking human being can be tied down to a view once expressed in the name of consistency. More important than consistency is responsibility. There can be no finality in thinking, and that's a very important component. In his way, his ideas, his writings were shaped. So broadly speaking, when we look at all the tracts and all the literature available on, I'll just wind up in 5 to 7 minutes and then. What is how do we look at these the 6 principles on which you want to look at? So those were that you have to look at the pros and cons of the linguistic states. You have to talk about protection of minorities. You have to talk about nationalism and nationality. And then added to these layers of things, you have the viability, the size of states and federal balance, checks and balance to the linguistic arrangement, and the official language and reorganization. Now, it's very important, and I could have showed those slides, but I'm not going to do that. That some of the solutions that Ambedkar had proffered at that point in time were actually being realized over a period of time. And in fact, these solutions were not being realized only in terms of ideas, but actually the divisions that the way he had proposed. He had proposed that one, we are still talking and has not been done, only an smaller part has been crafted. One is about division of Uttar Pradesh into, he had suggested 3 states, which was their capital as Meerut, Kanpur and Allahabad. He had suggested the division of Bihar into 2 states, which was realized, and he at that point in time had said North Bihar and South Bihar, and he had said that Ranchi should be the capital and Patna should be the capital of North Bihar. He had also suggested the division of Madhya Pradesh into 3 states. So you have, basically you have the 2 states, northern Madhya Pradesh and then the southern Madhya Pradesh, and then there were divisions within that. And as Asha was pointing out, that for him, all this was being guided by, and I'm not touching Maharashtra because she has already spoken on that how division of Maharashtra, talking about Bombay as a city-state. This was he was opposed to the idea of Bombay being a mixed state. So he was of the idea that one language, one state is fine, but one state, one language would become a very difficult proposition for his idea. So there is a lot to speak, but the time is limited, and I would just like to confine by saying that there was a person for whom it was not the emotional outburst that was responsible for talking about the reorganization of states. There was a person who was looking at he was contextualizing the needs of the people and then responding to those things at hand. So it is very important for us to remember whenever we talk of reorganization of states on what Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar has written. Thank you so much.